The night was June 5th, 1968. Robert F. Kennedy had just won the California Democratic primary. It was a huge step toward the presidency. He was in the ballroom of the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles. The crowd was electric. He gave his victory speech, ending with the words, "My thanks to all of you. And now it's on to Chicago, and let's win there." He was supposed to go through the crowd to meet the press, but the ballroom was packed. So his security team guided him through a back route, a kitchen pantry. It was a shortcut. It was also a fatal mistake. In that narrow hallway, crowded with people, shots rang out, chaos erupted. People screamed, people fell. When it was over, Robert Kennedy lay on the concrete floor, bleeding from a wound to his head. A 24-year-old Palestinian man named Sirhan was being held down on a steam table just feet away. A .22 caliber Iver Johnson revolver wrestled from his hand. The story seemed simple. An angry young man, a lone gunman, assassinated a presidential candidate. The Los Angeles Police Department, the lapdad, closed the case quickly. The media reported it. Sirhan was convicted. He's been in prison ever since. That's the official story. But it's not the whole story. It might not even be the true story. For over 50 years, a question has haunted this case. It's a simple question that complicates everything. Was there a second gunman who killed RFK? Let's start with the most important piece of evidence. The one thing that can't be easily dismissed or explained away. The autopsy. The man who performed the autopsy was Dr. Thomas Noguchi. He was the chief medical examiner for Los Angeles County. He was known as the coroner to the stars. He was meticulous. He was respected. And what he found was explosive. Robert Kennedy was shot 4 times, 3 bullets hit his body. One missed, passing through the shoulder of his jacket. The fatal shot, the one that killed him, entered his head behind his right ear. It was fired from a gun that was, according to Noguchi, almost touching him. He found powder burns on Kennedy's skin and hair. This meant the muzzle of the gun was no more than an inch or 2 away. Maybe even pressed right against his head. Noguchi was certain about this. He testified to it under oath. A contact wound from behind. Now think about the scene in the pantry. Where was Sirhan? Every single witness, without exception, says Sirhan was in front of Robert Kennedy. He was never behind him. The distance between them is debated. Some say 2 feet. Some say 5 or 6 feet, but nobody, not one person, ever placed Sirhan behind Kennedy with a gun to his head. Sirhan was standing in front of RFK facing him. Carl Uecker, a hotel maitre d', was escorting Kennedy. He saw Sirhan step out. He saw the gun. Uecker grabbed Sirhan's arm and tried to push it down, but Sirhan started firing. Uecker and several other men, including Olympic athlete Rafer Johnson and football player Rosie Greer, wrestled Sirhan onto a steam table. The whole time, Sirhan was in front of Kennedy. So you have a problem. A huge one. The official killer is in front of the victim, but the fatal wound comes from behind, at point-blank range. How can both of these things be true? They can't. The prosecution at Sirhan's trial had to deal with Noguchi's autopsy. They couldn't ignore it, so they tried to twist it. They suggested that in the chaos of the struggle, maybe Kennedy turned his head completely around at the exact moment Sirhan fired. Or maybe Sirhan's arm was contorted in some impossible way, reaching around Kennedy's head. These are theories born of desperation. They don't fit the witness accounts. They don't make sense in the real world. Dr. Noguchi himself never believed it. He stood by his findings for the rest of his career. He believed the evidence pointed to a second gunman. He wasn't a conspiracy theorist. He was a scientist looking at the facts, and the facts didn't add up. The autopsy alone is enough to cast serious doubt on the entire official story. But it's just the beginning. Then there are the bullets. This part of the story is a mess of confusion and destroyed evidence. It points to either a massive cover-up or one of the most incompetent police investigations in history. Sirhan's revolver, the Iver Johnson Cadet, held 8 bullets. That's the maximum it could fire without reloading. And there was no time to reload. He fired, he was tackled, the gun was taken. So there should be 8 bullets max. The lapdad said Sirhan fired all 8 shots. 3 hit Kennedy, a 4th passed through his jacket, that's 4. 5 other people in the pantry were also wounded by bullets. Paul Schrade, a Union official walking with Kennedy, was shot in the forehead. A TV reporter, William Weisel, was hit in the abdomen. A news photographer, Ira Goldstein, was hit in the hip. A campaign volunteer, Erwin Stroll, was shot in the leg, and a bystander, Elizabeth Evans, was grazed on the head. So we have Kennedy hit 3 times, plus 5 other people wounded. That's 8 bullets for 8 wounds. It seems to fit perfectly. Case closed. But it's not that simple. The police crime lab examined the bullets taken from the victims, and they couldn't match them all to Sirhan's gun. The bullet that hit Paul Schrade in the head and the bullet that hit William Weisel could not be positively identified as coming from Sirhan's revolver. The lead was similar, but the markings on the bullets, the ballistic fingerprints, were not a conclusive match. Then it gets stranger. FBI agent William Bailey was at the scene. He was one of the first investigators to arrive. He reported seeing bullet holes in the ceiling panels of the pantry. He marked them. He knew they were important evidence. Later, a police photographer also took pictures of what looked like bullet holes in the door frames and ceiling. So, how many bullets were there? We have the 8 wounds, then we have at least 2 bullet holes in the door frame and possibly 2 in the ceiling. That could bring the total number of shots fired to 10, 11, or even 12. Remember, Sirhan's gun only held 8. What happened to that evidence? The ceiling panels with the bullet holes disappeared from police cut. They were destroyed. The door frames with the bullet holes were also destroyed. The lab dad claimed they were just trying to collect the bullets inside, but in the process they destroyed the primary evidence. You can't examine a bullet hole that isn't there anymore. This destruction of evidence is a huge red flag. Why would you destroy the most crucial pieces of a crime scene in a presidential candidate's assassination? It makes no sense, unless you don't want people to find out how many bullets were really fired. Decades later, a new piece of evidence emerged, an audio recording. A freelance reporter named Stanislaw Przynski was in the pantry recording the chaos on a cassette tape. For years, nobody thought much of it, it was just noise. But in the 2000s, audio experts analyzed it using modern technology. They found something stunning. Embedded in the noise, they could isolate the sounds of the gunshots. And they didn't just hear 8 shots, they heard at least 13. They could even distinguish the sounds of 2 different guns being fired. The experts noted differences in the timing between shots, the intershot intervals. The pattern suggested 2 separate firearms firing from different locations. The lab has always dismissed this audio evidence. They say it's unreliable. But multiple independent experts have confirmed the findings. 13 shots from 2 guns. If that tape is real and the analysis is correct, then the lone gunman theory is impossible. So you have an autopsy that says the fatal shot came from behind. You have ballistic evidence that is inconclusive at best and missing at worst. And you have an audio recording that says more bullets were fired than the suspect's gun could hold. What about the witnesses? What did they see and hear? The scene was pure bedlam. It was a narrow, crowded space. People were pushing and shoving. It's not surprising that witness accounts vary. But some details keep coming up. Details that don't fit the official story. One of the most persistent is the girl in the polka-dot dress. Several witnesses reported seeing a young woman in a polka-dot dress with Sirhan either before or after the shooting. A campaign worker named Sandra Serrano was outside the hotel. She said she saw a woman in a polka-dot dress and 2 men run down a fire escape. She said the woman was gleeful, shouting, "We shot him! We shot Kennedy!" Another witness, a Kennedy campaign volunteer named Vincent DiPiero, was in the pantry. He saw Sirhan fire, but he also claimed he caught a glimpse of a woman in a polka-dot dress next to Sirhan. He said he saw her touch Sirhan's arm right before the shooting started. The police took these reports seriously at first. They put out an all-points bulletin for the woman, but they never found her. Or, more accurately, they found several women in polka-dot dresses that night, but none they could link to the crime. Eventually, the lab team dismissed the story. They pressured Sandra Serrano, gave her a polygraph test, and decided she was an unreliable, attention-seeking witness. She later said they intimidated her into changing her story, but the story never went away. It suggests that Sirhan was not alone, that there was at least one accomplice. It suggests a planned conspiracy, not the random act of a lone madman. Then there's the suspect himself, Sirhan Sirhan. He is a strange and contradictory figure. His motive, according to the prosecution, was his Palestinian nationalism. He was enraged by Robert Kennedy's support for Israel, particularly his promise to send 50 fighter jets there. The shooting happened on the first anniversary of the 6-day war between Israel and Arab nations. In Sirhan's apartment, police found notebooks filled with rambling anti-Zionist writings. One page repeated the phrase, "RFK must die. RFK must be assassinated." This seems like a clear-cut motive, an open and shut case. But there are problems with it. First, Sirhan has always maintained that he has no memory of the shooting. He remembers being at the hotel. He remembers drinking Tom Collins's, but he says he doesn't remember pulling the trigger or the chaos that followed. His memory just goes blank. Is he lying? Maybe. Or is something else going on? During his trial, his own defense team portrayed him as a disturbed and confused young man. But they didn't push the second gunman theory. They pursued a diminished capacity defense, arguing he wasn't fully in control of his actions. It was a strange legal strategy. It basically conceded that he was the killer, but argued he wasn't fully responsible. The strategy failed. He was convicted and sentenced to death, later commuted to life in prison. Years later, new lawyers and investigators started looking into Sirhan's mental state. They hired experts in hypnosis, and they came up with a shocking theory that Sirhan was a victim of hypnoprogramming. A real-life Manchurian candidate. It sounds like something out of a spy movie. But the evidence is compelling. One expert, Dr. Daniel Brown of Harvard Medical School, spent hours interviewing Sirhan. He concluded that Sirhan was in a hypnotic trance during the shooting. He believed someone programmed him to be a diversion. Think about it. Sirhan steps out in front of Kennedy. He creates a commotion. He fires his gun, maybe hitting some people, but not Kennedy fatally. All eyes are on him. Everyone rushes to tackle him. And in that moment of distraction, the real killer, standing behind Kennedy, fires the fatal shot. Then the real killer melts away into the crowd. Sirhan is left holding the gun. He is the perfect patsy. He doesn't even remember what happened, so he can't name his accomplices. The notebooks with RFK must die could have been a result of automatic writing, something a hypnotized person can be made to do. This theory explains so much. It explains his amnesia, it explains his bizarre behavior. It explains how he could be the shooter but not the killer. It also explains why a man supposedly driven by deep political conviction showed so little interest in politics before or after the crime. He was a blank slate. If there was a second gunman, who was it? For a long time there was no credible suspect. There was just a shadow, a faceless figure in the crowd, but then a name emerged. Thought Eugene Cesar. Thought Cesar was a security guard working at the Ambassador Hotel that night. He was not a regular employee, he was hired part-time from a security firm. And by sheer coincidence, or maybe not, he was walking directly behind Robert Kennedy in the pantry. He was in the perfect position to fire a shot into the back of Kennedy's head. This Cesar was a man who hated the Kennedys. He was a vocal right-winger. He made no secret of his political views. He told people he thought RFK had it coming, and he was armed that night. He carried a .22 caliber pistol, the same caliber as Sirhan's gun. He admitted to drawing his gun during the chaos. He claimed he drew it after the shooting started and that he didn't fire it. But his story has inconsistencies. He sold the .22 pistol he carried that night just a few months after the assassination. He claimed he sold it to a co-worker who later moved, and the gun was never seen again. This is highly suspicious. Why sell a key piece of evidence? In a police report, Cesar said he was grabbed by Kennedy and pulled to the ground when the shots were fired. But photographs from the scene show him standing in the crowd, looking on after Kennedy is on the floor. His story doesn't match the visual evidence. For years, Cesar was never seriously investigated by the lab dead. He was treated as just another witness. It wasn't until independent researchers started digging that the facts about him came out. His position behind Kennedy, his hatred for the Kennedys, his .22 pistol, his suspicious sale of the gun. Does this prove he was the killer? No. It's all circumstantial, but it makes him a person of interest. A very strong person of interest. He had the motive, the means, and the opportunity. He was in the right place at the right time. Or, rather, the wrong place at the wrong time for Robert Kennedy. Cesar maintained his innocence until he died in 2019. So why wasn't any of this brought up at the trial? Why did the lab T and the prosecution stick so rigidly to the lone gunman theory, even when the evidence contradicted it? To understand that, you have to understand the time. 1968 was one of the most turbulent years in American history. The country was being torn apart by the Vietnam War. Martin Luther King Jr. had been assassinated just 2 months before RFK, and cities were burning with riots. The nation felt like it was on the verge of collapse. In that climate, the authorities wanted simple answers. They wanted to restore order. The idea of a lone crazy gunman was manageable. It was a random act of violence that could be contained. The idea of a conspiracy, that powerful forces were murdering political leaders, was terrifying. It suggested that the country was truly out of control, that the system itself was corrupt. The lapdod had a special unit that handled the investigation. It was called Special Unit Senator, or SUS. Many of the detectives in this unit had ties to the intelligence community, to the CIA. They were not just regular cops, and their investigation has been heavily criticized. They ignored witnesses who didn't fit their narrative. They intimidated others into changing their stories. They destroyed crucial evidence, like the ceiling panels and door frames. They failed to investigate Thane Eugene Cesar properly. They presented a clean, simple story to the public, even though they knew, behind the scenes, that the case was full of holes. Was it a deliberate cover-up, or just a case of confirmation bias, where they decided on their suspect on night one, and then made all the evidence fit, ignoring anything that contradicted their theory? It's hard to say for sure. But the result is the same. the truth was buried. You have to ask, who would want Robert Kennedy dead? The list is long. President Lyndon B. Johnson despised him. Two men were bitter political rivals. J. Edgar Hoover, the head of the FBI, hated him. Kennedy, as Attorney General, had tried to rein in Hoover's power. The mafia wanted him dead. As Attorney General, Robert Kennedy had launched a war on organized crime, prosecuting mob bosses across the country. The anti-Castro Cuban exiles were angry with the Kennedys. They felt betrayed after the failed Bay of Pigs invasion. And then there was the CIA. Many in the agency believed John F. Kennedy was weak and were furious after the Bay of Pigs. Robert Kennedy was his brother's closest advisor, and he had made it clear that if he became president, he intended to reopen the investigation into his brother's assassination. That was a threat to a lot of powerful people who might have had something to hide about what happened in Dallas. Sirhan's alleged motive, his anger over Middle East politics, is almost too perfect. It's a plausible, self-contained reason that points away from any domestic conspiracy. It keeps the focus on a foreign-born other, and deflects from any difficult questions about the American power structure. So where does that leave us? You have the official story. Sirhan Sirhan, a lone gunman, motivated by politics, shot and killed Robert Kennedy. He was caught at the scene, he was convicted, he is in jail. It's a neat and tidy story. And then you have the evidence. The autopsy, which shows the fatal shot came from behind at point-blank range, where Sirhan never was. The ballistics, which show more bullets were fired than Sirhan's gun could hold, and that key evidence was destroyed by the police. The witnesses, who saw a mysterious woman in a polka-dot dress and placed Sirhan in the wrong position to fire the fatal shot. The suspect, Sirhan himself, who can't remember the crime and may have been a hypnotized patsy. The other suspect, Thane Eugene Caesar, a security guard who hated the Kennedys and was in the perfect position to be the real killer. And the investigation, which was so flawed and suspicious, that it looks more like a cover-up than a search for the truth. So, was there a second gunman? I can't give you a definitive yes or no. The courts have never officially recognized one. But if you look at the evidence with open eyes, it's almost impossible to believe the official story. The pieces just don't fit. The autopsy is the fact that breaks the whole narrative. You can't explain it away. Robert Kennedy's own son, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., has said he does not believe Sirhan killed his father. He has met with Sirhan in prison. He has reviewed the evidence, and he supports a new investigation. Paul Schrade, the man who was shot in the head while walking with Kennedy, has spent decades fighting to reopen the case. He is convinced Sirhan was a diversion, and that a second gunman fired the fatal shots. The story of Robert Kennedy's assassination is not just a historical mystery. It matters today. It's about whether we can trust our institutions to tell us the truth. It's about whether justice was served, or whether a terrible crime was covered up to protect powerful interests. The facts suggest that on that June night in 1968, two guns were firing in that crowded kitchen pantry. One belonged to Sirhan Sirhan, the man who was caught. The other belonged to a man who got away. Sirhan may have been a shooter, he may have tried to kill Kennedy, he may be guilty of but the evidence strongly suggests he was not the man who fired the fatal shot. The man who killed Robert Kennedy was someone else, and he was standing right behind him. The official story stands, but the questions never go away, and as long as they remain, the Sirhan Sirhan mystery is not a mystery at all. It is an unsolved crime.